Hello and welcome. This is CNBC Africa. Time to bring you the highlights of the second day of conversations here at the African Development Week 2017 in Dakar, Senegal. Now, ambition is one thing that has shaped a lot of conversations here, and one about the common currency for West Africa, as well as the pace of integration in the region. We spoke to Dr. Rene Kouassi, who is the Director for Economic Affairs at the ECA, for a look at this.
We try to make progress, but according to us, sometimes the rhythm is very low, very slow. But when we take region per region, you have some progress. In West Africa, for instance, there is we can move easily, free movement of person, free movement of capital, free movement of services. Maybe we can settle. When we go some countries, some region, we have problem, etc. But we have a plan. We call it the Abuja Treaty. So this year, we should have custom union in each region. ECOWAS is already there. East African Community is already there. COMESA, 7 countries out of 19 were already there. We go to Southern, SACU is already custom union. So we're coming progressively. The rhythm is slow, but we have to accelerate through the economic transformation by the industrialization.
Now, the single currency for the region also seems to be a big talking point.
Single currency, because, we have 44 currencies in Africa. It is not good. That impacts negatively the intra-African trade. Because if you export, Senegalese export in Gambia, he will be paying which money? In Dallas, when he gets Dallas, he has to go to central bank, he lose money. The Gambian also lose money. So this impact negatively our balance, balance of payment, etc., etc. So what we need is to have a common currency. Even if in Europe they have problem, because in Europe there is no political integration. So we learn lesson from Europe. That's why in Africa we go together on the two fronts, economic integration and political integration. So at the time we'll get a common currency, politically we're integrated.
Next, we revisited the land question when we spoke to John Kagwanja, the coordinator of the Land Policy Initiative at the Economic Commission for Africa. Here's more.
Indeed, you're right that land is a huge contributor to Africa's economies. And on the good side, we actually have a lot of land. As you know, 60% of the land that is still available for production and that can be harnessed is actually residing on the continent. So there's a good opportunity that we can use land to unlock the potential of Africa in terms of our economic growth. But we then should also address those issues that are hindering investments of land and also look at the consequences of those investments. So for one, we know that there has been a big rush for Africa's land from 2008 when there was a food and energy crisis. And a lot of foreign investors came to the continent and local investors as well. But we know that that land has not actually turned to production. About 50% of the land that was harnessed, that was over 200,000 hectares, was actually harnessed for production. So we need to see that land actually coming to production so that it can benefit the continent. And some of the hurdles are actually hurdles that come both from the investor side, but also from the government side. So there are obligations on both sides that needs to be looked at. And the consequences of that, it means that that land that has been converted from traditional authorities or Africans themselves, and people have been pushed off the land. That land is not being used for production, and people have already been moved aside. And compensation has not gone to those that also have given up the land. But beyond that, we actually don't want to see compensation per se. We want to see models that include the local communities as well as the investors as well.
There seems to be a policy issue when it comes to land transition, ownership, or even adjudication, or whether we need to set aside land for national development. What is the precedent in the African continent, and what are the real challenges thereof?
Okay, as you know, 60% of Africa's land is actually managed under traditional authorities. And the majority of this land is used communally, which means that we don't have the majority of Africans in the individual ownership of land, and we are not necessarily advocating for individual ownership of land. But on the other hand, we need to examine how in the traditional authorities, people can still receive secure rights to land. So where there are pressures coming from outside, do we have documented land rights? Do women have land rights? As you know, the African Union has a 30% campaign for making sure that by 2025, African women have 30% of the land, that is 30% of the land rights that are documented. You can say that 30% is a very low target, but at this point, we don't even know what is owned by African women. And that's a problem, because African women are the same ones who contribute the majority to agriculture, to food security. So these are some of the things that the legal frameworks need to be looked at, ensuring that there is equal access of land, men and women, and also marginalized communities as well. And the institutions of that managed land also need to facilitate delivery of land rights. As you know, it can take up to 10 years to secure land rights, whether it is land title or customary certificates. And so we are looking at cheap ways to be able to document land, not necessarily high-level land titles, but ways that the rights of communities or rights of those that actually till the land or that are using the land can. And also the rights of investors as well,
right,
because we are opening this up, yes.
Right. You cannot talk about a developing Africa without talking about human settlement. And that's why we spoke to Edlam Yemeru, the Chief for Urbanization and Social Development at the Economic Commission for Africa, for a look at what will be the future of Africa if it were best planned.
It's quite high on the conversation list, particularly in relation to the theme of the conference on growth, inequality and unemployment. We are going to be launching a major report on the question of urbanization and the role that it has to play in Africa's growth and transformation. So the issue is really on the agenda, really looking at how Africa's cities and human settlements can become a force of positive transformation and a means through which the challenges of growth and inequality and unemployment in Africa can be addressed.
What is the landscape like right now if you're to talk about urbanization and the need for proper housing in developing African cities?
The challenges are significant, but so are the opportunities. And this is the focus at this conference, as well as at the regional level at the moment, is looking at the opportunities that cities and human settlements offer to address a range of social, economic and environmental challenges. Of course, within that context, basic services and infrastructure, housing, employment and other environmental related challenges can be addressed if we do promote sustainable urbanization. So the way in which we design, plan, manage and govern our cities today is a critical factor in terms of the outcomes towards inclusive growth in Africa.
Right. You've talked about design and plan, and everybody looking at urbanization conversation in Africa thinks we have a big planning problem. How do we even start to unwire what we've done? Because some of the situations we face ourselves as a result of poor planning.
Absolutely. It all starts with planning, and planning with a purpose. And the purpose should be linked to the continental and national targets for growth and transformation, including unemployment, poverty, sustainable development. But the challenge we have today is not only do we have poor planning, which is poorly implemented, but the purpose for which we plan our cities is very much limited towards these social dimensions, instead of actually trying to unleash the economic potential of cities for Africa to achieve inclusive growth and transformation.
So what is the challenge? Is it funding? Is it policy directive? Is it requisite skills? Because we have a lot of well-educated Africans who are leading some of the cities that have very serious problems in regards to urbanization and being unplanned.
I would say it's all of those reasons. It's the institutional and capacity constraints, it's the financing, the question of who finances Africa's urban development. But even more fundamentally, it's the approach that we've taken towards urbanization. And we show in some of our analysis and research that there are a number of myths that we need to dispel around the urban narrative and the urban agenda in Africa. For example, there's an assumption that we can curtail or stop urban growth. Yeah, we cannot do that. It's inevitable. So urbanization is here to stay. The question is, how do we want to respond to it? Do we want to transform it into an asset, or do we want to let it develop organically and therefore become a liability in the long term?
Let's talk about sustainability for a moment. Obviously, there's a lot of conversation and pressure from all quarters to ensure that all our national plans are aligned to the sustainability agenda. How well are we doing in Africa, and what's the road that we still need to cover?
I think the progress is varied. A number of countries are working towards integrating the Sustainable Development Goals into their national development plans, but there's quite a concerted effort as to how to look at these Sustainable Development Goals in the context of national development priorities. And speaking specifically to urbanization, there's a dedicated goal on cities and human settlements, and that really propels the urban agenda as a policy priority at the global level. And I'd like to speak to also the Common African Position that was adopted at the highest level in Africa on housing and sustainable urban development in 2016. And this really speaks to this policy prioritization and recognition of the importance of Africa's urban future.
That's all for today from the African Development Week 2017 right here in Dakar, Senegal. But remember to make a date with us tomorrow, 1 p.m. Central African Time, for a look at Africa's biggest conversations, only on CNBC Africa.